There comes a moment in every man's life when the weight of his own dreams becomes too heavy to carry, and for Mike Hall, that moment arrived quietly, long before the world even noticed. He wasn't a celebrity trying to stay in the spotlight. He was a man fighting against time, against regret, and against the rust that had consumed nearly every corner of his life. People saw the jokes, the dreadlocks, and the old cars, but few ever understood the fear that pushed him toward the biggest decision he would ever make. And when that decision finally came, it changed everything for him, his family, and the show that made him famous. The man behind the rust, long before television crews set foot on the dusty lots of Tappan, British Columbia, Mike Hall had already lived several lives. Born on February 4, 1958, in St. Boniface, Manitoba, he moved west as a child when his father joined the Canadian Pacific Railway in Kamloops. It was here, on the open roads and forgotten fields of interior British Columbia, that Mike stumbled into what would become the defining obsession of his entire life. Rusted, abandoned cars that most people didn't give a second look. By the early 1970s, when he was barely a teenager, Mike was already sneaking behind barns, scanning back roads, and dragging home wrecks nobody else wanted. His friends thought it was strange. Neighbors shook their heads. But Mike didn't see junk. He saw puzzles worth solving, stories worth preserving, and potential buried beneath layers of decay. He never went to trade school, never earned a certificate, and never had a formal mentor. Instead, he learned by doing, failing repeatedly and fixing his mistakes with nothing but his hands and stubborn determination. By his 20s, he had already gathered dozens of vintage vehicles, each one a lesson in metal, engines, and grit, but while everyone else assumed he would become a mechanic, life pushed him in a different direction. During the 1980s, Mike entered the world of slope stabilization and rock blasting. He founded Chimera Springs Rockworks, a job that demanded a level of fearlessness most people didn't possess. He hung off cliffs, drilled into unstable edges, and detonated charges that would send entire walls of rock cascading down mountainsides. The nickname Rasta Blasta followed him everywhere, both because of his dreadlocked hair and his explosive work. It was in this dangerous career, not in the world of cars, where he first made real money. And instead of saving that income or investing in retirement, he poured nearly all of it back into the growing forest of cars that followed him through life. Every paycheck became another piece of rusted history. Every successful contract brought another forgotten machine home. By the time the 2010s arrived, his private obsession had quietly transformed into a collection unlike anything Canada had ever seen. A field of dreams that became a burden. By the early 2000s, Mike Hall's so-called field of dreams had grown into something far bigger than even he realized. What began as a few scattered vehicles on a small property had become more than 500 rusting classics spread across 5 acres of land near Shuswap Lake. Some had been sitting there for 20 years, others closer to 40. He remembered where each one came from, why he bought it, and what he hoped to do with it. The staggering number didn't impress him. It scared him. He was in his late 50s with a dangerous job, aching joints, declining stamina, and a growing understanding that he would never live long enough to restore even a fraction of what he owned. At home, tension grew quietly. His wife, who always preferred to stay out of the spotlight, loved Mike deeply but didn't share his obsession. Their family farm spanned 26 acres, yet she refused to let the land become a second graveyard of half-buried metal. That disagreement forced Mike to move his entire collection to the Tappan property, separating his passion from his family life. His son Connor, born in the 1980s, grew up watching his father chase rust instead of rest. And although he respected Mike's dedication, he often wondered what would happen when his father's body finally failed to keep up. Mike never questioned the addiction. He couldn't drive past an abandoned Buick or a forgotten pickup without stopping, knocking on a door, and offering a deal. To him, the cars were alive. They had soul, history, and stories worth saving. But to the outside world, they looked like nothing more than a mountain of metal slowly sinking into the earth. Officials began taking notice. Neighbors started asking questions, and Mike began experiencing a fear he had never known before, the fear of leaving a terrible burden behind for his family. His father had died at 60. Mike was getting close to the same age. He'd seen too many friends pass away unexpectedly, leaving their spouses overwhelmed with unsellable collections and financial chaos. He didn't want that to be his legacy. For the first time in decades, Mike admitted to himself that something had to change, because the field that once gave him purpose had quietly begun to swallow him whole. The sale that shocked the world. By 2016, the pressure around Mike Hall's massive collection had reached its peak. His body was aging, his blasting job was taking a toll, and the sheer scale of his rust empire had become overwhelming. For the first time in decades, he considered walking away. So he did something nobody expected. He put everything up for sale. Not a handful of cars, not a portion of the land. The whole thing, the 5 acres in Tappan, every vehicle, every unfinished dream. The asking price was $1.19 million. To Mike, that number represented hope. To the public, it looked absurd. News outlets mocked the listing. Locals shook their heads. Most people saw a scrapyard, not a lifetime of memories. Instead of lowering the price after receiving no serious offers, Mike did something more unusual. In 2017, he raised it to $1.45 million. What followed stunned even him. Photos of his rust-filled landscape spread across Canada. Articles called him the man who collected rust. Car lovers, families, and curious travelers drove hours just to see if the place was real, and then something happened that truly changed everything. Television producers started calling. Tyson Hepburn, who had worked on Highway Through Hell, recognized instantly that Mike wasn't a character. They didn't need to script anything, his life was the script. Producers wanted conflict, chaos, and jokes, but Mike pushed back. He didn't want a show that laughed at him. He wanted something that honored the cars and the people who loved them. A show about saving history, not mocking it. And against all odds, he got exactly that. In late 2018, with help from Mayhem Entertainment and Chorus Studios, Rust Valley Restorers began filming. Mike built a working shop on that same Tappan land, surrounded by hundreds of sunburnt relics. His best friend Avery joined as the problem solver. His son Connor stepped in as the voice of reason. And suddenly, the entire world was watching the man who once stood alone in a field of forgotten cars. But even as fame arrived, something darker lingered beneath the surface. The show brought joy and opportunity, but it also brought time limits, financial pressure, and an emotional attachment that became harder and harder to escape. The breaking point: money, pressure, and a race against time. When Rust Valley Restorers premiered in December 2018, fans saw charm, chaos, and heart. What they didn't see was the growing weight pressing down on Mike Hall behind the scenes. Running Rust Broa's restoration wasn't glamorous. It wasn't funded by a corporation or backed by investors. Mike himself covered most of the bills, the staff costs, the tools, the parts, and the endless hours wasted on cars that couldn't be saved. His blasting business had financed his life for decades, but now TV filming slowed his work by nearly 30%. He said it plainly once. Filming didn't make the shop more productive, it made it harder. While the show gained millions of fans, Mike's finances quietly crumbled. He poured nearly $2 million into his passion over the years, building dreams out of metal that didn't always sell. Sometimes he restored a car so beautifully he couldn't bring himself to let it go. Other times, he gave buyers huge discounts because he liked them. Connor tried to set rules, limits, and budgets, but Mike couldn't follow them. Emotion kept winning over logic, and every decision carved deeper into his savings. Still, the emotional toll weighed heavier than the financial one. By 2020, Mike was nearing 62, the same age his father never reached. Health scares among friends reminded him how fragile life really was. He once said, half joking but entirely truthful, that after years of blasting rock and breathing fumes, he could drop dead tomorrow. That single thought kept coming back. What are my wife and kids supposed to do with hundreds of cars if something happens to me? And then the legal blow came. In early 2021, officials discovered that the Rust Bros shop sat on agricultural land. For years, the regional district tolerated it, but the moment Mike tried to build a new shop extension, everything changed. Suddenly, he was out of bounds. Suddenly, Rust Bros was an illegal business on paper. He applied for an exemption, hoping his efforts, fame, and tourism benefits would matter. Local officials supported him. But in May 2023, the Agricultural Land Commission officially denied his request. Just like that, his entire operation found itself on borrowed time. The day the rust disappeared. By the summer of 2021, Mike Hall knew there was only one path left. The zoning battle, the wildfire danger, the health worries, the financial strain, everything pushed him toward the decision he had feared most of his life. After nearly 4 decades of collecting, fixing, dreaming, and hoarding pieces of automotive history, he decided to sell almost everything. Not some of the cars. Not a portion of his yard. Nearly all of it. He quietly sold the Tappan property first, but the cars weren't part of the deal. They had to be removed. And that meant a single massive auction with no reserve prices. The date was set. October 2nd, 2021. Over 500 vehicles, many of which hadn't moved in decades, would leave his life in a single day. On the morning of the auction, Mike looked out over the field that had defined him, the rusted Cadillacs, the forgotten Buicks, the rare muscle cars, the shells of European classics, the broken projects he always swore he'd get to someday. He had spent years telling the world that these machines had souls. Now he had to watch strangers tow them away. Some cars sold for a few $100s, others sold for $5,000 or $10,000. But Mike didn't care about the money. What mattered to him was where the cars were going, whether the people who bought them loved them enough to save them. He even asked several buyers to send him photos if they ever got their cars running again. By the end of the day, everything was gone. 4 decades of passion vanished in hours. All but about 40 cars, the ones he simply couldn't let go, were scattered across Canada and the U.S. He said it felt like a blur. A lump had formed in his throat as one trailer after another rolled away, carrying pieces of his life he'd kept longer than some friendships. But at the same time, he felt something else. A strange, quiet relief. He had given his family the gift he wished someone had given others before they passed. A future without a burden. In spring 2022, Rust Valley Restorers aired the emotional auction as its Season 4 finale fans worldwide assumed this was the end. How do you continue a show when the dream it's built on has been sold off? After the fall. A new beginning. Mike never expected. When the world watched the final episode of Season 4 in 2022, most believed they were witnessing the end of Rust Valley. Mike Hall had sold the land. The fields were empty. The dream seemed finished. Fans mourned the loss of a man whose life had been defined by rusty metal and impossible optimism. But behind the cameras, something unexpected began to unfold. Without hundreds of cars weighing him down, Mike discovered something he hadn't felt in years. Breath. For the first time since his 20s, he wasn't buried under stress, deadlines, and obligations. He didn't have to worry about zoning threats. He didn't wake up imagining wildfires burning through his collection. And he didn't fear leaving a nightmare behind for his wife and son. He finally had space, physically, emotionally, and financially, to simply exist. But the irony was almost comedic. Even after clearing the field, the cars started coming back, not because Mike chased them, because people chased him. Former owners, collectors, and fans began contacting him, offering cars they didn't want to see crushed or forgotten. He once joked that the cars found him, and it wasn't far from the truth. By 2023, he had somehow accumulated nearly 200 cars again, though this time they were spread out and manageable. Even more surprising, the show wasn't over. Chorus Studios and History Channel had quietly filmed new episodes throughout 2022. There were winter test drives, new restoration challenges, and the familiar chaos between Mike, Avery, and Connor. The team had downsized, but the spirit was intact. By fall 2024, Rust Valley Restorers returned for Season 5, following Mike as he worked on carefully chosen projects: a 1968 Shelby GT 350, a 1941 Diamond T, and a handful of cars he refused to abandon. Off-camera, Mike embraced a new role. He became a mentor in the Canadian car community, a spokesperson for eBay Motors, and a quiet icon to young mechanics who admired his honesty and imperfection. He attended shows, fundraisers, and local events, greeting fans with the same grin he'd worn since the beginning. Today, in his late 60s, he still lives in the shoe swap with his wife and dog. His son Connor remains by his side, wiser now and prepared to take over one day, if he chooses. Their bond, once strained by impossible responsibilities, is stronger than ever. Mike Hall may have lost his empire of rust, but in letting it go, he found something far more valuable: peace, purpose, and the ability to keep doing what he loves, but on his own terms. In the end, Mike Hall didn't disappear the way many fans feared. He simply stepped out from under the weight of a dream that had grown too heavy to carry alone. Losing hundreds of cars might have looked like the end of everything, but for Mike, it became a second chance. A chance to breathe, to rebuild, and to keep restoring the machines that still speak to him. What do you think was the hardest part of Mike's journey? Letting go of the cars, the legal battles, or the pressure on his family? If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories just like this. Thank you for watching.